I was standing there holding a small gift bag wrapped in lavender tissue paper, the kind I always used for Lily's birthday presents. It had tiny silver stars printed across it. I thought it looked magical, something a little girl would remember. That's me by the front entrance of Villa Gianni's, the Italian place my daughter and I used to call our spot. Only this time, she was already inside. So was my sister, my son, even my 8-year-old granddaughter, all of them, except me. The moment the hostess opened the door and waved me in with a cheerful, "Table for one," I caught a glimpse of them, laughing, forks clinking against plates, a birthday cake already on the table, lit candles flickering. My heart didn't drop. It cracked, slowly, like the sound a house makes when settling after a storm. It doesn't shatter all at once. It groans, creaks, then finally falls quiet. They looked up one by one, as if a cold gust had swept through the restaurant. Heather's eyes widened. Rena dropped her spoon. Josh just stared. No one moved. No one smiled. Not even Lily. I didn't say a word. I simply looked at each of them, calmly, clearly, and stepped back outside, but I didn't leave. Not yet. I stood at the window for a moment, breathing in the early evening air. The world outside still spun as if nothing had changed. People strolled past with shopping bags. Couples shared pasta under string lights. A man played soft saxophone across the street. I took it all in while clutching the gift bag that suddenly felt heavier than it was. That moment, that silence, that pause, that stare, was the second my story truly began. Because I wasn't just a woman forgotten by her family. I was a woman finally seeing them for who they really were. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Before that night at Villa Gianni's, before the heavy silence and the sidelong glances, I would have told you I had a close, loving family. Nothing extravagant. We weren't the kind to take group vacations or pose perfectly for Christmas cards. But we were together. At least I thought we were. My name is Marla Jameson, and for most of my adult life, I was a mother, a sister, and the default family caretaker. I'd retired from my job as a school librarian 5 years ago, but my days never really slowed down. My calendar was full of babysitting weekends, birthday baking, school recitals, Thanksgiving prep, and last-minute "Can you watch Lily Hour" calls. I said yes every time. Heather, my daughter, is 34, fiercely independent, a bit sharp around the edges, but I love that about her. I raised her to be strong. She has a good job in marketing, a husband who mostly stays quiet at family gatherings, and a daughter, Lily, who became the center of my universe the moment I held her for the first time. Josh, my son, is 31 and lives a few hours away. He calls me less now, but when he does, his voice still has that soft, boyish tone that makes me forget he's not 10 anymore. He travels a lot for work, so he isn't around often, but I never doubted that he cared. Then there's my sister, Rena. We were inseparable once, shared secrets, swapped recipes, cried together when our mother passed. She's younger by 3 years, but always acted like the older sibling, organizing every holiday, texting everyone the group plans. She had the clipboard, the spreadsheet, the family chat, and I was the glue. That's what they used to call me. "Mom, you're the glue," Heather once told me after a Thanksgiving dinner I'd hosted alone, right down to the table settings and pecan pie. None of this would work without you. And I believed it. I believed I was needed. Maybe not for big things, not the kind you write speeches about, but in quiet, steady ways. I remembered birthdays. I sent handwritten thank you notes. I taught Lily how to tie her shoes, how to spell butterfly, and how to bake snickerdoodles on a rainy day. I kept the traditions alive. The Sunday dinners, the board games, the long walks after dessert. I didn't ask for much in return, just to be included, to feel seen. Maybe a call now and then. A hug that lasted longer than 2 seconds. A little warmth. Last year, for my 61st birthday, they all came over to the house. Heather brought a cake, store-bought but thoughtful. and Lily had made me a glittery card with flowers and a sun drawn in the corner. Rena gifted me a scarf. Josh called in through Zoom and promised he'd visit soon. It wasn't a big celebration, but it was something. I remember cleaning up alone that night, humming quietly, my heart full from just having them around. That's how low my bar had fallen. Just being around me was enough, and I didn't even notice. Looking back now, I can see the signs were already there. The conversations where I was talked over, the inside jokes I didn't understand, the group photos I had to ask someone to take on my phone, the little pauses before someone asked me to bring dessert instead of join them for dinner. But I ignored those signs, because when you love people, truly love them, you don't assume malice. You give grace. You make excuses for their busy schedules, their short tempers, their distracted glances at phones while you speak. You tell yourself, they didn't mean it. It's just stress. It's not personal. But sometimes it is, and sometimes that love you pour into everyone else starts to pool up in quiet places, unnoticed, unreturned, uninvited. I didn't know it yet, but the life I thought I had, the family I believed I belonged to, was slowly fading beneath me, like standing on wet sand that keeps slipping away as the tide pulls in. You don't realize how unsteady you are until you fall, and that fall would come. But before it did, I kept giving, kept showing up, kept believing that if I just held on tighter, they'd pull me closer. Instead, they pulled away. The first time I felt it, truly felt it, was my birthday last year. My 61st. Not a milestone, not the kind of birthday people rent halls for or gather a crowd around, but still mine, still worth remembering. I had no big expectations. I wasn't hoping for a surprise party or balloons. All I really wanted was to hear my daughter's voice first thing in the morning like I usually did. But that morning, my phone stayed silent. I kept glancing at it as I folded laundry, made myself a cup of tea, wiped down the counters, rituals I did without thinking. Around 11 a.m., I checked to make sure my ringer was on. It was. By noon, I told myself maybe she was swamped with work. By 2 p.m., I was checking Facebook to make sure she hadn't forgotten entirely. At 4:17 p.m., the text came. OMG, Mom, I am so sorry. We've had the craziest day. Happy birthday. Love you. No call. Just a quick message like she was texting a coworker she forgot to email. I told myself it was fine. That at least she remembered. I sent back a heart emoji and a thumbs up. Then I went into the kitchen and made myself a small sandwich I didn't have the appetite to finish. That should have been the moment I stopped pretending everything was the same, but I didn't. I chalked it up to stress. Busyness, mom brain, even though Heather hadn't had mom brain in over 7 years. It's funny how we become master storytellers when it comes to the people we love. I could have written a novel with the excuses I made that year. I became an expert at justifying small slights, like the way Raina stopped asking me to help plan the holidays, saying, "You've done it enough. Just relax this time." Only she never called to ask if I was coming. And when I offered to bring something, she'd say, "No, it's all covered." Like the way Josh would only call me when he needed something. A recipe, his old report cards, a phone number. Not to talk, not to catch up, just to retrieve. I was a human archive, nothing more. But the real red flag? The one that finally made me pause? It was Thanksgiving. Heather had texted me a few days before asking if I could bring my pecan pie. I was thrilled. It's a family favorite, something my own mother passed down. I spent the whole day baking, carefully arranging the pecans, even tying a ribbon around the pie box. When I arrived at Rena's house, I realized there were more cars than usual in the driveway. She hadn't mentioned it was a full gathering. I walked in, pie in hand, and instantly felt the buzz of conversation hush slightly. Not completely, just enough. There was no seat for me at the table, literally. All the chairs were filled, and there was no extra plate. I stood in the doorway with my pie, waiting for someone to notice, for someone to say, "Mom, we'll squeeze in another chair, come sit by me." but no one did. After a moment of awkward hovering, Rena smiled tightly and said, "We didn't expect everyone to show up, so we're short a chair, but there's a stool in the kitchen." A stool? In the kitchen? I laughed lightly and said, "Oh, no worries. I'll just stand for now." Heather didn't even look up. Josh was too busy talking to his cousin about his latest work trip. Lily was playing with the dog under the table. So I put the pie down and stood by the counter, watching my family pass around food, toast glasses, share stories, and laugh. While I picked at a few green beans on a paper napkin and told myself this was fine, that was the first real crack. Because it's one thing to forget a call. It's another to forget someone exists in the room. Later that night, as I gathered my coat, I heard Heather tell Rena, "Next year we should just do it at our place. Smaller, easier." Rena nodded, already nodding before Heather even finished the sentence. They didn't say it out loud, but I heard it anyway. Without her. That's when I realized I hadn't been invited. I had just shown up. And slowly, painfully, I began to understand. This wasn't about forgetting. It was about fading. They say, being forgotten once is a mistake. Being forgotten repeatedly is a message. I just didn't want to hear it. Not at first. Because once you acknowledge it, you have to do something about it. And I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. After Thanksgiving, I started noticing all the tiny ways I'd been slowly edged out of my own life. It wasn't dramatic. No slam doors, no screaming matches, just a steady drip of quiet dismissal that wore me down without anyone ever raising their voice. The family group text was the first place I noticed it. I used to wake up to messages from Heather, Rena, and Josh, little updates, funny pictures of Lily, weekend plans. Slowly, the notifications stopped. I'd scroll back and realize there had been conversations. I just wasn't included anymore. A new thread had been made without me. Once I responded to an old message with a simple, "Hope you all have a good weekend." No one replied. I told myself maybe they were busy. Maybe no one saw it. I waited for hours, checking my phone every few minutes, refreshing like that would change anything. But the silence stayed. And it wasn't just virtual. The real world started getting quieter, too. One Saturday morning, I drove by Heather's neighborhood on my way to the farmer's market and saw Lily outside on her scooter with Rena and Heather. They were laughing, bundled in coats and scarves, sipping what looked like hot cider. It was the kind of chilly autumn morning we used to spend together. I slowed down, waved as I passed, but they didn't see me, or maybe they did and pretended not to. I'll never know. The following week, I sent Lily a package, a book we'd read together when she was little, one she used to beg me to reread at bedtime. I wrote a note inside the front cover. "To Lily, my favorite bookworm. Love always, Nana." I didn't hear back. Not a thank you. Not even a text from Heather. That one stung more than I expected. I began wondering if maybe I had done something wrong. Had I overstepped? Said something? Been too involved? Too needy? The question spun in my mind late at night as I sat in bed, rereading old texts like they held a clue I missed the first time. When I asked Rena if everything was okay, she smiled like nothing was wrong and said, "You're just sensitive, Marla. Don't take things so personally." The way she said it, soft but dismissive, felt like being patted on the head and told to go sit quietly in the corner. But the worst part? I started believing her. I started believing all of them. I began shrinking myself in conversation, afraid to take up too much space. I stopped offering to host holidays. I waited for invites that never came. I found myself apologizing for things I hadn't done just to smooth over discomfort I didn't cause. Everywhere I turned, there were reminders that I wasn't needed. My granddaughter stopped calling me Nana and started calling me Marla like the other adults. Josh called once to ask if I had the title for the old car I'd signed over to him. When I tried to tell him about my garden or the new book I was reading, he cut me off saying, "Sorry, Mom, can we talk later? I'm in the middle of something." He never called back. And yet, I kept showing up because that's what I'd always done. I baked cookies for the school fundraiser, even though I wasn't asked. I mailed birthday cards 2 weeks early. I checked in when someone was sick. I offered rides, covered costs, smiled through the disappointment. I kept trying. But each time I reached out, it felt like a hand disappearing into fog. No one reached back. No one said, "We miss you." No one said, "Where have you been?" Because as far as they were concerned, I'd already faded out of focus. It's strange how being erased doesn't always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like silence, like being left off a guest list, like hearing secondhand about a family game night or a dinner Heather hosted just for close friends. I went from being the glue to being the ghost, still present, still watching, still caring, but no longer visible. And once you start to feel invisible, even your own reflection starts to blur. The thing about humiliation is that it doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it walks in looking like your own child, smiling politely, brushing past you with words that cut deeper than they sound. It doesn't have to be loud to hurt. It just has to be witnessed. For me, it happened on a Thursday evening in early spring. Lily had a school recital. Her class was performing a short musical about animals in the rainforest. Heather had mentioned it offhandedly 2 weeks prior, saying, "You can come if you want, it's not a big deal." But she never followed up. No time, no location, nothing. I found the details on the school website. I didn't want to ask again. I didn't want to seem pushy. I arrived 15 minutes early, holding a small bouquet of yellow tulips. Lily's favorite. I'd tied them with a bit of green ribbon and tucked a note into the wrapping that read, "Sing loud, my little songbird." I chose a seat in the middle row, not too far back, and sat quietly, watching families greet each other, take pictures, laugh softly as they waited for the lights to dim. I spotted Heather and Rena walk in together. Heather was holding Lily's costume in a garment bag, and Rena had her phone up, already recording. They didn't see me, or maybe they did and didn't wave. I'm still not sure which would hurt more. The recital was beautiful. Lily was the smallest monkey on stage, and she had one solo line. When she said it, I smiled so wide my cheeks ached. I clapped the loudest when it ended, even stood up briefly to cheer. Afterward, parents poured into the hallway to greet their kids. I stepped out, flowers in hand, heart full, ready to hug my granddaughter and tell her how proud I was. That's when it happened. I found them near the vending machines. Heather crouched down, fixing Lily's headband, Rena snapping pictures. I approached slowly, quietly, not wanting to interrupt. "Lily," I said softly, extending the tulips toward her, "these are for you, sweetheart." Lily reached for them, but before her fingers touched the stems, Heather's voice sliced through the air. "Oh, Mom," she said with a quick, forced smile, "you really didn't have to come." She said it loud enough for the other parents nearby to hear. Not angry, not kind, just embarrassed. There it was, a single sentence that held so much weight I could feel it in my bones. You didn't have to come. I looked at Rena, hoping for a look of sympathy, of defense, of anything. She avoided my eyes, pretending to adjust her phone. I froze. I looked at Lily. She hesitated, then pulled the flowers gently from my hand and whispered, "Thank you," before turning back toward her mother. I stood there holding nothing. Other parents brushed past me, greeting each other with warm hugs and congratulations. A father nearby joked to his wife, "Everyone's trying to out-grandparent each other." She laughed, then glanced at me, standing alone, and quickly looked away. That moment didn't scream. It whispered. It whispered that I was no longer part of their unit, that I had become an outsider. Someone to tolerate, not someone to welcome. A guest, not family. I nodded politely, muttered something about beating the traffic, and walked down the hallway alone. Each step echoed too loudly on the polished floors. Outside, the cool air hit my face like a slap. I sat in my car for a while before starting the engine, my hands on the steering wheel, tulip-scented fingers gripping the leather. On the drive home, I kept replaying her words. You didn't have to come. Not, I'm glad you came. Not, she'll be so happy you saw her. Not, we saved you a seat. Just that. And with that sentence, I felt something inside me bend. Not break, not yet, but twist just enough to make everything after feel different. That was the night I realized it wasn't about forgetting. It was about removing. It was about slowly rewriting my role in their lives until I wasn't needed, and then making me feel foolish for showing up. And the worst part? I still wanted to be there. I still wanted to matter, even after all of it. That's what shame does. It makes you beg for scraps from the very table that pushed you out. But I would only beg for so long. After the recital, something in me shifted. Quietly. Permanently. It wasn't rage or revenge that bloomed inside me. It was absence. Like someone had turned down the volume on everything I used to feel. The ache was still there, but it was muffled now. Dull. Familiar. I didn't storm out of their lives. I didn't confront anyone or demand explanations. I simply stopped knocking on doors that were already half closed. I stopped texting first. I stopped offering to babysit. I didn't send my usual check-in message that Sunday morning, and you know what happened? Nothing. Days passed, then weeks. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was comfortable, natural, like I had been airbrushed out of a photograph and everyone liked the new version better. It was then I realized I wasn't leaving. I was already gone. They had just never bothered to tell me. For the first time in decades, I started living only for myself, though I didn't realize that's what I was doing at first. I cleaned out the hall closet, not for Lily's art supplies or Heather's seasonal decorations, but for me. I donated 3 bags of old tablecloths and chipped holiday mugs I'd kept for family occasions. I made tea in a single mug I liked. I lit a candle and watched it burn while I listened to old jazz records no one else appreciated. One afternoon, I passed Villa Gianni's, the restaurant where we'd celebrated so many birthdays, anniversaries, graduations. I paused outside. Inside, a young couple sat across from an older woman, maybe a mother-in-law. She laughed with her hands, animated and alive. It hit me then. I hadn't laughed like that in years. Not really. Not with my family. I kept walking. Heather didn't call. Josh didn't check in. Rena sent a mass email about a cousin's baby shower and I never responded. I think she noticed, because 2 days later she forwarded it again, just in case. Still, I stayed quiet. Somewhere along the way, I stopped checking their social media. I no longer searched their names out of habit. I stopped torturing myself with photos I wasn't in and captions that read, "family time," like I had never existed. Instead, I started waking up with a strange kind of freedom. It was empty, yes, but it was also mine. I sat at my kitchen table one morning, sipping coffee, and realized something that made me flinch. I hadn't heard Lily's voice in over a month, not even in passing. That used to be unthinkable. She used to call me after school just to say she found a cool rock or that her goldfish blew bubbles that looked like hearts. Now, nothing. A small voice in my head whispered, "You should call." But I didn't. Not because I didn't love her, but because I did. So much that I couldn't keep showing up in a family where love was something you had to beg for. I wasn't going to teach her that kind of love. I wanted her to remember me as someone who showed up when it mattered, not someone who lingered where she wasn't welcome. So I stayed away. Then came the week of my 62nd birthday. No plans were made. No one asked what I wanted. There were no texts, no messages, no mention of dinner. I had a hunch something was happening, but I also knew they weren't going to tell me about it. And yet, I wasn't surprised. When your absence is easier for people than your presence ever was, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. On the morning of my birthday, I made a decision. Not out of spite, but from something much colder, something quieter. Resolve. I baked myself a small chocolate cake, just enough for one. I didn't decorate it. No candles, no writing, just the cake, soft and silent. I placed it on a blue plate, poured a glass of wine, and sat at the table alone. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sorry for myself. I didn't even feel lonely. I felt like someone who had been living in a house that wasn't hers, finally realizing she didn't need permission to leave. For the first time in a long time, I felt still. I didn't leave my family to punish them. I walked away because staying would have been the same as telling them it was okay to keep treating me like an afterthought. And I was done being forgotten. Rock bottom doesn't always come crashing down on you. Sometimes it arrives like a whisper, a slow, sinking realization that nothing is going to change and that no one is coming for you. For me, it came the evening after my quiet, one-person birthday. I had spent the entire day alone. No one called, no one came by, not even a message from Josh, not even a happy birthday text from Heather. The silence wasn't shocking anymore. That's what made it worse. It was as if the people I loved most had deleted me, not from their phones, but from their habits. I washed the one dish I'd used, wiped the counters like I always did, and sat in the dim kitchen light with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. I could hear the refrigerator humming and the ticking of the clock on the wall. I thought of calling someone, an old friend maybe. But who wants to be the person that calls just to admit they didn't remember me today? I walked to the hallway mirror and looked at myself. My face was thinner. My hair, mostly gray now, framed my cheeks in soft waves. I had always taken care of myself, worn perfume even at home, kept lipstick in my purse just in case. But that night I looked at a woman who no longer recognized the person staring back. There's something indescribably painful about feeling like a ghost in your own life. Not angry, not bitter, just invisible. To fill the silence, I turned on the TV, but even the laugh tracks on the sitcom reruns made me feel worse. It was as if the world was moving on, joyfully and loudly, while I sat still, like a paused frame in someone else's movie. At some point, I opened my laptop and mindlessly scrolled through old photo albums. Digital folders filled with birthdays, pool days, Sunday dinners, my face smiling in everyone. A younger version of me, arms around Heather and Josh, Lily on my hip, Rena beside me laughing at some inside joke. I looked so needed back then. And now I couldn't even get a seat at a recital. I couldn't even get a phone call on my birthday. I clicked on a video, Lily's third birthday party. We had done a butterfly garden theme in my backyard. I'd spent hours the night before making cupcakes with edible flower petals and hand-painting butterfly wings for the kids. In the video, Lily runs to me, arms wide, squealing, "Nana!" That was the moment the tears came. Not because of what was happening now, but because of everything I had poured into those years, into those people. Without realizing, the well was drying up. I cried quietly. No sobs, no theatrics, just a slow, steady flow of tears that soaked my collarbone. I whispered to the screen, "Where did I go?" Because it wasn't just that they forgot me. It was that I had forgotten myself. I had become so consumed with keeping everyone together, with being useful and needed and always available, that when they stopped needing me, I didn't know who I was anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered from room to room, touching old souvenirs, framed photos, shelves filled with keepsakes I'd saved for the family I thought would always need reminding of where we'd come from. I reached the attic ladder and pulled it down. The wood creaked under my feet as I stepped into the space I hadn't visited in years. There were boxes, labeled in my handwriting, Josh's baby clothes, Heather's school art, letters from Mom. I opened one and found a Mother's Day card Heather had made me in second grade. It said, "You're my whole world, Mom." I sat on the attic floor and held it close to my chest. That was rock bottom. Not the attic, not the card, but the realization that I had been someone's whole world. And now I didn't even make their dinner plans. I wasn't mad. I was empty. That's what real bottom feels like. Not explosive, not dramatic, just hollow. a place where you finally see everything for what it is and what it's never going to be again. And from that still, aching place, something surprising begins to grow. Not anger, not revenge, but clarity. And that's where change begins. The days after my birthday passed in a blur. I moved through them on autopilot, making tea, walking in the mornings, feeding the neighbor's cat while she was away. The ache was still there, but it no longer roared. It pulsed quietly like a bruise under the skin. Then came the discovery. It was a Sunday afternoon. The sky was overcast and the air smelled like rain. I was dusting the bookshelves in the living room when I noticed something wedged between two old photo albums. It was a slim envelope, cream-colored, slightly curled at the corners. At first, I didn't recognize it. I assumed it was an old card, maybe from Lily or one of the kids. But when I slid it out and turned it over, I saw it wasn't addressed to me at all. It was a wedding invitation. Heather's. My daughter's vow renewal, scheduled for 2 months earlier. I stood still, holding the envelope like it might burn me. The front read, Heather and Brian, a celebration of 10 years of love. An intimate evening with family and friends. Saturday, March 11th, Villa Gianni's, 6 p.m., Villa Gianni's, the same place I would walk into alone weeks later, on my own birthday. I felt the wind leave my lungs. I flipped through the pages inside the envelope. Menu choices, RSVP instructions, even a small note. Please no gifts. Just your presence is all we ask. Presents. Mine hadn't even been requested. I sat down on the edge of the couch, the invitation resting in my lap. My first thought wasn't anger, it was confusion. Why hadn't I been told? Why hadn't I been invited? I had watched Lily that weekend. Heather had said they were just going to catch up on errands. Rena had mentioned a girls' spa day, but none of it was true. They had gathered, my entire family, my daughter, my sister, my granddaughter, and they had chosen to leave me out of it, intentionally. This wasn't an oversight. It was a decision. I stared at the invitation for a long time, reading and rereading the date, the words, the names. I noticed small details I normally would have found sweet. Heather's handwriting, the lavender envelope liner, the embossed hearts. None of it felt sweet now. It felt sharp. Decorative betrayal. I stood and walked to my bookshelf, pulling down a dusty photo album from Heather's first wedding. I flipped through it slowly. Photos of her beaming in her ivory gown, Josh giving a toast, Rena fixing her veil, Lily barely a toddler then, throwing flower petals with sticky fingers. In every single one of those photos, I was there, holding her dress, wiping Lily's nose, smiling through the nerves and the chaos. I was in every background, every corner, like furniture that held the room together. And now, I didn't even get an invitation. It wasn't just forgetting. It was rewriting. Heather had rewritten her life story and edited me out of it. I set the album aside and stood at the window, watching the wind pick up and toss petals from my front garden across the lawn. I had always believed that family ties were unbreakable, that if I just kept showing up with love, eventually it would be returned. But love that has to be earned isn't love. It's approval. And approval has a leash. That invitation became a mirror that showed me exactly where I stood, not just with Heather, but with all of them. I wasn't family. I was history, someone to remember fondly, not someone to include. I could have thrown it away. I could have called Heather in a fury. I could have driven to Rena's house and demanded an explanation. But I didn't do any of that. Instead, I folded the invitation neatly, slid it back into its envelope, and placed it in a drawer with all the other things I used to cherish. Lily's first crayon drawing, a pressed flower from Josh's 5th grade science project, Heather's college acceptance letter. I closed the drawer slowly, and when I did, I felt something else close too. A door, not slammed, just quietly, finally, closed. Because now I had the proof. The kind you can't ignore or explain away. The kind that strips the last bit of denial from your heart. They hadn't forgotten me. They had moved on without me. And now I would move on too. It's strange how awakening doesn't feel like fire at first. It doesn't roar or scream or demand. It arrives as stillness, the kind of stillness that comes after you've cried all you can cry. That was me, sitting at my kitchen table the morning after finding the wedding invitation. The drawer was still closed, and I hadn't touched it again. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that once made me feel lonely. But now, it just felt honest, unmasked. I wrapped both hands around my mug of coffee and stared out the window at the garden I used to keep perfectly manicured. The weeds had started creeping in. The rosebush was thinning. A few broken pots leaned sideways in the dirt. It looked forgotten. And I realized I had been pouring all my energy into people who didn't even see me, while the parts of my life that did need me, my passions, my peace, my joy, had withered from neglect. That's when I knew. Something had to change, not them, me. Because I couldn't control whether Heather called, or if Rena invited me, or if Josh remembered I existed between business trips, but I could decide how much power their silence held over me. I could decide to stop offering my love to people who only showed up when it was convenient. That was the beginning of the shift. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was slow, deliberate, like thawing from the inside. I pulled out a notebook from the kitchen drawer and opened to a blank page. At the top I wrote, "Things that belong to me," and beneath it, my time, my peace, my voice, my boundaries, my joy, my name. My name, not Mom, not Nana, not Rena's sister, just Marla. For years I had lived as a role, a function, the dependable one, the warm one, the background support beam. I was always someone for someone else, but never for myself. I had mistaken usefulness for love, availability for worth. I decided to go for a walk, not my usual loop through the neighborhood where I might see familiar faces or glance at Heather's street from a distance. I chose the lake trail instead. Quiet, wooded, removed. The wind smelled like pine and rain-soaked leaves. Birds rustled in the trees above. With each step, I felt something unfamiliar. Lightness, a kind of freedom that wasn't born of escape, but of return. Return to myself. I remembered things I hadn't thought about in years. How I used to sketch flowers in the margins of books. How I once dreamed of taking a solo trip to a cabin in Maine to write. How I used to play Nina Simone records and dance barefoot in the living room before the house was filled with baby monitors and laundry baskets. I wasn't just fading in their eyes, I had faded in my own. The world had become so small, shrunk down to school pickups, phone calls that didn't come, and dinners eaten in silence. But here, in the open air, I saw how wide the world could be. How full it used to feel. I sat on a bench overlooking the water. The sun peeked through clouds, glinting off the surface in soft ripples. I pulled the notebook back out of my coat pocket and wrote a new line. I don't need to be invited to belong, because I did belong. To the world, to myself, to something bigger than a forgotten place at a dinner table. I had confused proximity with closeness, but the truth is, someone can sit right next to you and never really see you. And someone far away can hear your heart in every silence. From that moment on, I stopped waiting. I stopped checking my phone first thing in the morning. I started journaling instead. I pulled out old recipes I used to make just for fun. I painted the guest bedroom in a shade of blue I liked. Bright, not subtle. I changed the locks. Not because I was afraid, but because it was my home now, fully. And I was done leaving the door open for people who never planned to walk through it. The awakening wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Just me, standing in the middle of my own life again, saying, I'm here. And this time I meant for me. Once the awakening settled in me, it didn't come with fanfare or grand speeches. There were no confrontations, no teary phone calls, no dramatic exits. Instead, I chose silence, but not the kind they had used against me. This was intentional silence, rooted, strong, a silence with purpose. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I didn't announce my change of heart. I simply started preparing, slowly, quietly, and only for myself. It started with the small things. I canceled the family phone plan. I had been paying the bill for over a decade, ever since Heather and Josh went off to college. Back then, it made sense. But now it was just another way I'd kept myself tethered to people who no longer reached for the line. I walked into the cell phone store one morning and asked the clerk to transfer my number to a solo plan. He looked at the screen and said, "You're covering 5 lines, ma'am." I nodded. "Want to drop them all?" he asked. I smiled. Yes, all of them. No one called to ask why the phone stopped working. No one even noticed. That was confirmation, not heartbreak. I began going through the rest of my bills, scanning for anything with their names. The car insurance policy? Josh hadn't driven that car in 3 years. Gone. Streaming services? Heather's login still used my name. Changed. I reclaimed everything with my name on it, not out of anger, but because it was mine. The next step was financial. I hadn't touched my savings in years. I'd been saving just in case. For medical emergencies, for helping the kids if they ever fell on hard times. But I had fallen on emotional hard times, and no one had come running. So I made an appointment with my lawyer. Sitting across from him in that sterile little office, I slid my will across the desk. "I want to make some updates," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Family change?" "You could say that," I replied calmly. I removed Heather and Josh as primary beneficiaries. I'd already given them more than enough. I added a local women's shelter instead, a scholarship fund for girls who wanted to become teachers. I left my house to a library foundation in my hometown, and I set aside a fund just for Lily, not to be accessed by her parents, and only if she contacted me directly as an adult. I didn't do it to hurt them. I did it because I finally understood the difference between loving someone and subsidizing their absence. After the paperwork was signed, I sat alone in the parking lot for a long time. The air felt lighter. For the first time in years, my name didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a signature. I started walking differently too. Head up, eyes forward. I no longer kept my phone clutched in my hand, waiting for a call that wouldn't come. I deleted the family group chat and muted every social media notification that used to make my heart drop. Then came the day I bought the gift, a soft pink sweater for Lily, embroidered with tiny daisies across the sleeves. I had seen it in the shop window during one of my walks. It reminded me of the garden we once planted together, how she used to call daisies sun kisses. I bought it, wrapped it in lavender paper with silver stars, just like I always did. But this time, it wasn't to win anyone over. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a message to myself. You still have love to give. Just give it where it matters. I placed the gift on my entryway table. I didn't write a note. I didn't plan to deliver it. It was symbolic, a reminder that I didn't need an invitation to show up in my own story. I just wanted to stop by. I saw the post, figured I'd return the favor. Rena cleared her throat. "Marla, you didn't have to—" "I know," I interrupted. "I didn't have to do a lot of things." Josh shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. Heather looked like she wanted to disappear under the table. No one had ever seen me like this. Not composed and quiet, but centered. Unshakable. That's the thing about taking your power back. You don't need to shout. You don't need a scene. You just need to show up, unbothered. Because the moment they realize they can't control your presence or your absence is the moment they lose control entirely. "You all look surprised," I said with a small, knowing smile. "Don't worry, I'm not angry, just aware." I turned to Lily and kissed the top of her head. "Be kind," I whispered, "and never shrink yourself." Then I stepped back. No one moved, no one asked me to stay, and I didn't wait for them to. I walked out the same way I came in, tall, steady, and in full possession of myself. But as I reached the door, I heard something behind me. A chair scraping the floor. Quick footsteps. It was Lily. She rushed after me, arms outstretched, and hugged me from behind. "I miss you, Nana," she said, voice trembling. I turned and knelt to her level, holding her small hands in mine. "I know, baby," I said, "but you can always find me. You just have to want to." She nodded, and I saw the tears forming in her eyes. I wiped one away gently. "Don't let anyone tell you who belongs in your heart," I whispered. "That's yours to decide." Heather called her name from the doorway, voice tight with tension. Lily turned and looked at her, then back at me. She didn't say anything else, just held the gift tighter and walked back inside. As the door closed behind me, I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel guilt. I felt peace. Because I hadn't come to make them uncomfortable. I came to remind them and myself that I was never the problem. I had just stopped asking for crumbs from a table I used to set. And now, that table looked different to them. Colder, less secure. Because the one person they thought would always be there had stopped playing her part. The shift wasn't loud. It was quiet, elegant, powerful. Because the power didn't come from making them feel small. It came from finally feeling whole. Confrontation doesn't have to come with raised voices or slammed doors. Sometimes the most powerful confrontations are the quietest ones, the kind where no one yells but everything is said. 3 days after I left Villa Gianni's, Heather showed up at my door. No call, no text. I saw her car through the window and paused before opening it. I didn't rush to greet her. I didn't smooth my hair or check the mirror. I let her knock once, then twice. Then I opened the door, calm and unbothered. She looked tired, frazzled. She hadn't come with anger. She came with confusion. "Can we talk?" she asked, clutching her coat. I stepped aside and nodded. Of course. She walked into the living room like it was unfamiliar, like she wasn't sure she still belonged there. And honestly, I wasn't sure she did either. I sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded in my lap. She stood for a moment, then sat across from me. "I didn't know you were coming," she said. I looked her straight in the eyes. "I know." She hesitated, chewing the inside of her cheek. "You didn't say anything. You just showed up, and then you left." I waited. "Everyone was shocked," she added. "Rena is still talking about it." I nodded slowly. "Good." Heather looked down at her hands. "I guess I just didn't think you'd really come." That was it. That was the sentence that hung in the room like smoke. "You didn't think I'd come," I repeated evenly, "to my own birthday dinner. I didn't mean it that way." "But that's how it is," I said gently. "You planned it without me, celebrated me without me, and you didn't think I'd show up. That wasn't an accident. That was a decision." Heather's eyes welled up, but I didn't flinch. "I didn't know how to fix things," she said, her voice cracking. "It felt like we were just growing apart." "Growing apart doesn't mean cutting someone out," I said. "You didn't drift. You dismissed me." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I didn't know you felt so left out." "That's the problem, Heather. You didn't ask." There it was. The truth neither of us had said out loud for years. She had assumed my silence meant contentment, that my giving meant I didn't need receiving, that because I always had shown up, I always would. "I was tired," I continued, "tired of being the one to organize, to reach out, to clean up, to show up. I was waiting for someone to notice I'd stopped, but no one did." Heather looked down again. I leaned forward. "You all got used to the version of me who never asked for anything. And the second I stopped being convenient, I stopped being invited." There was no bitterness in my voice, just clarity. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was finally telling the truth. Heather took a breath. "I didn't realize you were carrying all that." "I didn't either," I said softly, until I put it down. She nodded slowly. You seemed different that night. I was, I said, because I finally saw that I didn't need to beg for a place at a table I helped build. I could just walk away. Heather looked up, her eyes searching mine. So, what now? Now that was the moment I'd rehearsed in my head over and over. But when she asked, I didn't feel the need for some grand declaration. I had nothing to prove. I had no desire to punish her. But I also wasn't going to go back to the version of myself who accepted scraps in exchange for silence. What now is... I stop waiting, I said. For calls, for invitations, for permission. I live my life. You're welcome in it, Heather. But I won't chase you to be there. She nodded slowly, taking that in. I want Lily to have you in her life, she said quietly. I want that too, I replied. But on my terms. I won't be used for photo ops or backup plans. I'm not furniture. I'm not filler. I'm her grandmother. I matter. Heather bit her lip. Okay. There was no hug, no emotional breakdown. Just a moment of truth between two women who finally saw each other clearly. She stood and walked to the door. Thanks for talking, she said. Thanks for coming, I replied. And as the door closed behind her, I felt no regret. No hope for what might change, just peace. Because I had spoken my truth, not in anger but in power, and for once, that was enough. Let me know when you're ready to expand. Section 13. The twist/final justice into 700 words. 2 weeks after that quiet conversation with Heather, something happened that I hadn't planned. It started with a letter, not a phone call, not a visit. A letter, tucked neatly into my mailbox, handwritten on soft cream paper in a familiar, looping script. It was from Lily. I stood on my front porch, holding the envelope like it was a living thing. I hadn't heard from her directly in months, and suddenly here it was, her voice in ink. I took it inside and opened it slowly, carefully, like it might tear under my fingers. It wasn't long, just a single page. Dear Nana, I didn't know they didn't tell you about the party. I thought you were busy. Mommy said you didn't want to come, but I knew that wasn't right. I miss you. I like the sweater. I wear it when I read at night. It smells like you. Can I come over soon? I don't care what they say. I just want to bake cookies with you. Love, Lily. My hand trembled as I held the letter to my chest. Not from sadness, from something deeper, something like hope, but sturdier, like justice. Because here's what they never saw coming. That the legacy I'd poured into that child, every bedtime story, every recipe, every whispered affirmation had taken root. They couldn't erase me from her life. Not fully. A week later, another envelope arrived. This time, it was from my lawyer. It was the finalized update to my will. In black and white legal language, it reflected every choice I'd made during those months of silence. Heather and Josh were no longer the primary beneficiaries. The house was to be sold, and the funds split. Half to a local girls' scholarship foundation, the other half to a nonprofit that offered housing to older women who'd been abandoned by family. But what made it perfect, what gave it its sting of finality, was the clause I had added for Lily. To Lily, I leave a trust fund accessible when she turns 21, contingent on a simple request, that she write me one letter, in her own words, telling me what she's learned about kindness. Not a test, not a trap, just a seed. They had tried to make me disposable, but I had planted something they couldn't touch. A few days later, I received a text from Josh. Heard about the will. Seriously? After everything? No greeting, no warmth. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, exactly, after everything. I didn't wait for a reply. I turned my phone off and left it on the counter. I had other things to do. That afternoon, I visited the local shelter where part of my estate would eventually go. I introduced myself to the director, a silver-haired woman named Carla, with eyes full of history. When I explained who I was and what I planned to give, She didn't thank me immediately. She said, "Why?" And I told her the truth. Because once I gave everything I had to a family who forgot me. Now I want to give it to women who remember who they are. Her eyes softened. That's the best kind of giving. That night, I stood in the middle of my kitchen, the same kitchen where I once waited for calls, baked for birthdays I was never invited to, sat in silence on holidays. Only this time, I wasn't waiting. I was baking cookies, because Lily was coming over the next day. Heather had texted again, this time softer. "She keeps asking to see you. I'll drop her off tomorrow if that's okay." It wasn't a reconciliation. It was an acknowledgement. A quiet understanding that I was no longer a prop in their lives, but a force of my own. The next afternoon, Lily ran through my front door like she always used to. No hesitation, no performance, just love. "Nana," she squealed, wrapping her arms around me. "You smell like cookies," I laughed, kneeling to hug her tight. "You still smell like daisies," I whispered. She grinned. "That's because I wore the sweater." We spent the afternoon just like we used to, baking, reading, dancing to old music. And when she asked why I had stopped coming around, I knelt beside her, looked her in the eyes, and said, "Because sometimes grown-ups forget how to be kind. But I never forgot you." She nodded. "I didn't forget you either." And just like that, the circle I thought was broken began again. Not the old way, but the right way. Because real justice doesn't always come from revenge. Sometimes it comes from walking away, with your head high, and being followed by the one person who truly sees you. Reconnection doesn't always arrive with a grand apology. Sometimes it knocks softly, hesitantly, like a guest unsure if they're still welcome. A few weeks had passed since Lily's visit. We had spent that day in a rhythm we both remembered, mixing cookie dough, dancing to old Motown records, laughing at the powdered sugar on our noses. When Heather picked her up that evening, she didn't come to the door. She stayed in the car, engine running, sunglasses on, even though it was nearly dusk. Lily turned to me before leaving and whispered, "Can I come again next week?" "You can always come," I said. She smiled, hugged me tightly, and ran to the car. Heather gave a small wave, barely a flick of the wrist, then pulled away without a word. I didn't reach out again. Not to her, not to Josh, not even to Rena. I had nothing left to explain. Then a letter arrived in the mail. It was from Josh. The envelope was stiff, formal, thicker than a regular card. I opened it carefully, expecting a complaint about the will, a demand for answers, or maybe even anger disguised as civility. But it wasn't any of that. Inside was a single page, typed, "Mom, I've been thinking about what you did, about the changes, the will, Lily's letter, everything. At first, I thought you were trying to punish us, but now I get it. Maybe not everything, but I get enough to know I was wrong. You were always there, always, and I treated you like you always would be. But you're not, and you shouldn't have to be. I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm not asking for that. I just want you to know I see it now. I see you now. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Love, Josh." I read the letter 3 times, and each time it felt heavier, not with guilt, but with clarity. Josh had always been the quiet one, the easy one. He rarely fought, but he also rarely showed up. And in some ways, that quiet neglect had been the most painful, because it let me believe that silence was safety, when really it was absence wearing a polite face. His letter didn't fix anything, but it acknowledged it. And that was more than I expected. I didn't write back. Not yet. I wasn't in a place to repair what had been broken for years. But I wasn't bitter either. I had simply built something new, something sacred, something mine. A few days later, I ran into Rena at the local grocery store. She was standing in the baking aisle comparing 2 brands of flour. When she looked up and saw me, her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I gave her a polite nod and started to walk past. Marla, she said, stepping forward, can we talk? I paused, then turned to face her. About what? She looked down at the flower in her hands. I think I messed things up. That's an understatement, I replied, not cruelly, just truthfully. I didn't mean to shut you out, she said. It just happened. No, Rena, I said calmly. It didn't just happen. You chose it. Over and over, with every missed call, with every event I wasn't told about. That wasn't a mistake. That was a pattern. She sighed. I know. We stood in the aisle for a moment, the scent of cinnamon and sugar in the air, as shoppers moved past us like waves breaking on either side. I'm sorry, she finally said. I miss you. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel a need to rescue her from discomfort. I didn't feel obligated to smooth things over. I miss who we used to be, I said, but I'm not sure we're those people anymore. She nodded slowly. Can we try? I didn't answer right away, because it wasn't a question with a yes or no. We'll see, I said. But I'm not going back to who I was. I've worked too hard to find her again. Later that night, I thought about all of them, not with pain, not with anger, just observation. They were circling back, not because I demanded it, but because I stopped needing it. That's the thing about reclaiming your worth. It doesn't scream, it whispers. And if people are listening, really listening, they'll hear it. And if they don't, then they were never meant to. I didn't need them to love me the way I once begged for. I needed to love myself enough to walk away when they didn't. And now that I had, the door wasn't locked, but it would never be left wide open again. It's strange how quiet peace can feel after a life spent straining to be heard. Weeks had passed since that last letter, since the run-in with Rena, since Lily's visit. My home was calm again, warm, not from the buzz of company, but from the absence of tension. The energy had shifted, not because everyone had changed, but because I had. One morning, I woke before sunrise, as I often did, and stepped out onto my porch with a steaming mug of tea. The sky was still dark, but the stars had begun to fade. There's something beautiful about that moment before the world wakes up. Something forgiving. I sat on the porch swing, wrapped in my robe, and let the quiet settle around me like a second skin. This was the part no one tells you about healing. It isn't loud or flashy or full of movie-worthy reunions. Sometimes it's just you in the stillness, realizing you no longer feel hollow where the pain used to live. I took a sip of tea and looked around. The garden had started to bloom again. I'd spent the last few weeks pulling weeds, repotting soil, and planting fresh bulbs. The rose bush had come back stronger than I expected, thick with color, full of new life. There was something deeply poetic in that. My granddaughter had come by twice more since that first visit. Each time she brought something, once a bracelet she'd made, once a poem she wrote about strong grandmothers. We didn't talk about what happened. We just lived forward. We baked, we danced in socks on the hardwood floor, and once, we painted a picture together, a sunflower tall and bright and unbending. It now hung in my hallway. I've been thinking about what you did, about the changes, the will, Lily's letter, everything. At first, I thought you were trying to punish us, but now I get it. Maybe not everything, but I get enough to know I was wrong. You were always there, always, and I treated you like you always would be. But you're not, and you shouldn't have to be. I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm not asking for that. I just want you to know I see it now. I see you now. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Love, Josh. I read the letter 3 times, and each time it felt heavier, not with guilt, but with clarity. Josh had always been the quiet one, the easy one. He rarely fought, but he also rarely showed up. And in some ways, that quiet neglect had been the most painful, because it let me believe that silence was safety, when really it was absence wearing a polite face. His letter didn't fix anything, but it acknowledged it. And that was more than I expected. I didn't write back. Not yet. I wasn't in a place to repair what had been broken for years. But I wasn't bitter either. I had simply built something new, something sacred, something mine. A few days later, I ran into Rena at the local grocery store. She was standing in the baking aisle comparing two brands of flour. When she looked up and saw me, her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I gave her a polite nod and started to walk past. "Marla," she said, stepping forward, "can we talk?" I paused, then turned to face her. "About what?" She looked down at the flour in her hands. "I think I messed things up." "That's an understatement," I replied, not cruelly, just truthfully. "I didn't mean to shut you out," she said. "It just happened." "No, Rena," I said calmly. "It didn't just happen. You chose it. Over and over, with every missed call, with every event I wasn't told about. That wasn't a mistake. That was a pattern." She sighed. "I know." We stood in the aisle for a moment, the scent of cinnamon and sugar in the air, as shoppers moved past us like waves breaking on either side. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "I miss you." I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel a need to rescue her from discomfort. I didn't feel obligated to smooth things over. "I miss who we used to be," I said, "but I'm not sure we're those people anymore." She nodded slowly. "Can we try?" I didn't answer right away, because it wasn't a question with a yes or no. "We'll see," I said. "But I'm not going back to who I was. I've worked too hard to find her again." Later that night, I thought about all of them, not with pain, not with anger, just observation. They were circling back, not because I demanded it, but because I stopped needing it. That's the thing about reclaiming your worth. It doesn't scream, it whispers. And if people are listening, really listening, they'll hear it. And if they don't, then they were never meant to. I didn't need them to love me the way I once begged for. I needed to love myself enough to walk away when they didn't. And now that I had, the door wasn't locked, but it would never be left wide open again. It's strange how quiet peace can feel after a life spent straining to be heard. Weeks had passed since that last letter, since the run-in with Rena, since Lily's visit. My home was calm again, warm, not from the buzz of company, but from the absence of tension. The energy had shifted, not because everyone had changed, but because I had. One morning, I woke before sunrise, as I often did, and stepped out onto my porch with a steaming mug of tea. The sky was still dark, but the stars had begun to fade. There's something beautiful about that moment before the world wakes up. Something forgiving. I sat on the porch swing, wrapped in my robe, and let the quiet settle around me like a second skin. This was the part no one tells you about healing. It isn't loud or flashy or full of movie-worthy reunions. Sometimes it's just you in the stillness, realizing you no longer feel hollow where the pain used to live. I took a sip of tea and looked around. The garden had started to bloom again. I'd spent the last few weeks pulling weeds, repotting soil, and planting fresh bulbs. The rosebush had come back stronger than I expected, thick with color, full of new life. There was something deeply poetic in that. My granddaughter had come by twice more since that first visit. Each time she brought something, once a bracelet she'd made, once a poem she wrote about strong grandmothers. We didn't talk about what happened. We just lived forward. We baked, we danced in socks on the hardwood floor, and once, we painted a picture together, a sunflower tall and bright and unbending. It now hung in my hallway.